Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're strapping in for a pretty deep descent into the towering and famously bleak philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer.
Famously bleak is almost an understatement.
Right. He's this crucial figure who took Kant's critique of pure reason and basically just ripped off all the comforting ethical layers.
And revealed the primal chaotic core underneath. It really challenges the very foundation of how we perceive reality.
It really does.
And our mission today is to take his most complex work, the world as will and representation, and really distill it.
Break it down into these two fundamental opposing realities.
That's right. The world as representation or idea, which is the structured, orderly reality you perceive. And then the world as its inner essence, the blind, unified, suffering will.
And what makes this so crucial for you, the listener, is Schopenhauer's foundational claim. He argues that objective reality is not some passive mirror just reflecting the world.
No, not at all.
Our mind is an engine.
No.
It is constantly building that external reality moment by moment. And the true surprise is what he believes lies beneath that mental construction.
A striving force that is singular, utterly irrational, and the source of, well, all suffering.
So let's start there. Let's start with the world we all think we inhabit, the world as idea. Schopenhauer argues that the entire physical world is simply a phenomenon of the brain. We kind of accept that our senses gather data, but how exactly does our brain take this raw input and construct an objective external reality?
It starts with what he calls raw sensation. You have to think of sensation as this local subjective feeling. He calls it a miserably poor thing.
A miserably poor thing.
Yeah, it's limited to the region just inside your skin. So if you touch something hot, the sensation is just painful heat right here, right now. That feeling alone is incapable of containing anything objective.
So it's just a feeling, it's not out there.
Exactly, it's not out there at all.
So, okay, if the feeling of hot is just this subjective input, how does my mind instantaneously create the idea that a stove caused this heat and then place that stove 10 feet away in the kitchen?
This is where the understanding steps in. Schopenhauer says the understanding has one foundational, innate, built-in tool, the law of causality.
Okay.
It immediately perceives that subjective sensation as an effect. The understanding that applies this tool, and it demands that an external cause must be responsible for that internal effect.
And how does it place that cause outside of me?
It uses space, what he calls the form of the outer sense, which is just lying ready in the intellect, or, the brain.
Right.
The understanding applies causality and space at the same time to project the determined cause outside the organism. And that process transforms the subjective sensation into objective perception.
The world becomes a series of causes and effects organized spatially.
Precisely. The implication is stunning. The only reason the physical world appears objective, with separate things that interact causally, is because our brain is enforcing these built-in rules.
It's a construct.
Absolutely. And this process constructs what we call the principium individuationis.
The principle of individuation.
Right. This principle, which is conditioned by space and time, is the absolute necessity for there to be a multiplicity of things. He calls it the veil of Maya, the great illusion that separates me from you.
So without a mind to perceive it, that external world it has no existence as we understand it.
Exactly right. And this leads to his famous, almost unsettling conclusion. He says, suns and planets without an eye that sees them and an understanding that knows them are absolutely meaningless for the idea.
Wow.
The entire existence of the phenomenal world depends upon the first conscious being, even if it were, and this is his quote, that of an insect.
An insect.
Yeah.
So our whole universe hinges on that first flicker of consciousness.
That's the argument.
Okay, let's drill down into the operating system that governs this world as idea. The principle of sufficient reason, or the PSR.
Right, and Schopenhauer realized that previous philosophers had treated the PSR as this one monolithic law.
One big rule.
One big rule. He insisted it was a common name for four distinct and irreducible fundamental laws of our cognitive faculty. And this is so critical because it forces absolute clarity in our thinking.
This is a major correction he's making to, well, the entire Western philosophical tradition. He's saying there isn't one all-encompassing reason why. There are four different types of intellectual necessity.
Correct.
Can you walk us through them? How do they differ?
Certainly. The first and most familiar is the principle of sufficient reason of becoming.
Ratio findi.
Yes, this is just the law of causality we were discussing. It governs the entire physical world. It demands that every physical change must have a cause that precedes it in time. This is the understanding at work.
The law of motion and change. Okay, what about the second one, the abstract one?
The second is the principle of sufficient reason of knowing, ratio cognoscendi. This governs abstract concepts, judgments, logical proof.
So arguments.
Exactly. It's the law of inference. The reason for accepting a conclusion lies in the logical premises that precede it. If you accept A and you accept B, then C must follow. This is the realm of reason and logic.
So one is physical necessity, the other is conceptual necessity. What about the third, which deals purely with the structure of reality?
That is the principle of sufficient reason of being, or ratio essendi. This doesn't deal with causes in time or logical arguments, but with the necessary connections imposed by space and time themselves.
Like in geometry.
Perfect example. The reason for the position of every line in a geometrical proof, or the reason why C follows B and B follows A in a sequence, it's not a cause, it's an inherent necessary relationship of being.
I see. So understanding the layout of a building or a sequence of dates relies on this principle. What's the fourth root?
The fourth, and perhaps most relevant to us, is the principle of sufficient reason of acting, ratio agendi. This is the law of motivation. It governs the actions of conscious beings. Every deliberate human action must have a motive, a perceived reason, a desire, a goal that causes the will to act. It links knowledge to physical movement.
So if the PSR dictates everything in this phenomenal world, then everything we experience it's fleeting.
Yes.
It's temporary and fragile because it only exists as a link in a chain of relative existence.
That's the philosophical deficiency he identifies. Everything subject to the PSR has a merely relative existence. It only exists through and for another thing.
Yeah.
It isn't absolute.
And this clarity lets him critique some philosophical giants who muddled the waters by confusing these four roots.
Oh, absolutely.
Tell us more about the critique of Descartes and Spinoza, because this is where his system gets, well, it gets weaponized.
It does. Schopenhauer accused them of blurring the strict boundary between reason, which is logical consequence, and cause, physical change, all to serve theological ends.
How so?
Descartes, in arguing for God, claimed the immensity of God was the cause or reason he needs no cause.
Wait.
Schopenhauer points out that immensity might be a logical reason.
The PSR of knowing.
Right. It might logically imply an uncaused existence, but it cannot be the physical cause, the PSR of becoming, for that existence. It's a kind of intellectual shortcut.
It's an elegant category error. It lets a premise substitute for physical reality.
Exactly. And Spinoza takes it even further with causa sui, or self-caused. Schopenhauer just calls this a most palpable confusion of reason and cause and a contradictio in adjecta.
A contradiction in terms.
Yes. It's like arbitrarily declaring that the perpetual motion machine, which needs an infinite chain of causes, starts here. It's a cheat. And the logical necessity of the PSR demands that if the idea is relative, we must find the absolute reality underlying it.
We have to find the will.
We must find the will.
So we pierce the veil of Maya, we step outside the boundaries of space, time, and causality, and we encounter the will, the thing in itself. What is the fundamental characteristic of this will?
The will is the inner content, the essence of the world. It's what grounds all phenomena. And because it lies outside time and space, it is utterly free from the principium individuationis. Which means it knows no multiplicity, it is indivisible and single. It's essential to grasp this. The will isn't distributed across the world. The entire unified will is objectified in every single manifestation, whether it's a galaxy or a human impulse.
If this will is unified, how can it possibly account for the sheer difference between, say, a falling stone and a thinking, emotional poet?
It manifests through what he calls grades of objectification.
Grades.
The lowest grades are the universal forces of nature. Gravity, chemical affinity, elasticity. These are, in themselves, immediate expressions of the will's striving. They're the primal urges of the universe.
And we have to stress the revolutionary idea that these forces are groundless. I mean, doesn't that make all scientific inquiry meaningless if the fundamental forces have no cause?
Not meaningless, but limited. That makes them original forces. He says, it is senseless to demand a cause of gravity or electricity because they are immediate objectifications of the will.
They come before causality.
They are the prior conditions of all causes and effects. They stand outside the causal law. So scientific inquiry can explain how gravity acts, the law of its appearance in the idea, but it can never explain why there is this desire for mass to attract mass. That why is the will.
Okay, so the law of causality can tell us that the cause of a stone falling is the Earth's proximity, but that only determines the when and where of the force expressing itself. The force itself is just brute fundamental reality.
Precisely. And the highest grade of objectification is us. In man, the will, the inner nature of these forces, is illuminated by the clearest knowledge by the intellect.
So our will manifests as an individualized, fierce character.
And our actions, consequently, are determined by motives, which is the fourth form of the PSR.
This brings us right to the moral problem and the root of Schopenhauer's famous pessimism. We have the will, the sovereign, and the intellect, which he calls the ministerial council. Where is the conflict?
The conflict is structural. The will is the eternal primary part, and the fundamental character, which is the will, is unchangeable. It's fixed.
It's fixed for life.
For life. The intellect, however, is the temporal secondary part. Our knowledge is highly determinable. We can learn, we can improve our understanding of the world, but the core self, the will, remains what it is.
So we can refine our methods, but we can never, ever change our fundamental desires. That sounds like a perpetual trap of intense suffering.
It is. Schopenhauer argues that all volition, all striving, arises from want, and want is suffering.
By definition.
By definition. Since the will is constant striving, and most desires remain eternally unfulfilled, intense volition is a constant source of intense suffering. Even the quiet periods are plagued by ennui or profound boredom. We are constantly deferred from peace.
How does one escape this cycle, then, if the character is unchangeable? Is it even possible?
The path to goodness or nobility arises from the penetration of the principium individuationis.
Seeing through the illusion of separation.
It's seeing through the illusion of separate individuals. The noble man transcends egoism by recognizing that the suffering he sees is not merely another's problem, but the suffering of the one indivisible will, which is also his own essence.
That reframes compassion as a profound metaphysical insight, not just a sentimental feeling.
It makes it a prerequisite for any true ethical action. And this knowledge, when it's purified by immense suffering, can lead to the highest ethical state, absolute, entire resignation or holiness.
The denial of the will to live.
A turning away from all motives, which results in deliverance from a world whose whole existence is suffering.
And you mentioned this denial cannot be willed, which is a fascinating paradox.
That's right. It's not achieved by a deliberate choice or some intellectual striving. It proceeds from a changed mode of knowing, a spontaneous and radical shift in perspective.
It just happens to you.
It feels unearned and involuntary, which is why the Church traditionally calls it the work of grace or the new birth. The intellect guides the will to deny itself.
So since philosophy struggles to quiet the will, Schopenhauer looks to art as a temporary antidote to suffering. If the will is constantly demanding, what does aesthetic pleasure offer us that ordinary perception does not?
Aesthetic pleasure is the delight in pure perceptive knowledge as such, entirely independent of the will.
Right.
When we engage with art, we momentarily stop perceiving objects as instruments of our desires or our fears. We cease to be the struggling subject of willing, and we become the pure, painless, objective subject of knowing.
And during this momentary freedom, we're contemplating the Platonic ideas, the eternal blueprints.
Precisely. Art reveals the fixed, eternal prototypes, the stable grades of the objectification of the will, which are free from the endless flux of the phenomenal world.
And that's why looking at a great painting brings such profound peace. We're looking at eternal necessity, not temporal change. You draw a sharp contrast between the beautiful and the sublime in this context.
Oh, yes. The beautiful is pure knowledge gained without a struggle. The object, a flower, a pleasing melody, is so conducive to contemplation that it gently lifts us out of the will's demanding consciousness.
It's easy.
It's easy. The sublime requires an intellectual struggle. We look at an object that's hostile to our will, a massive ocean, a terrifying chasm, and our personal survival instinct is triggered.
Of course.
But the intellect consciously asserts itself, detaching from that personal fear, and contemplatively grasps the pure, overwhelming idea of immeasurable force or magnitude.
And the struggle itself is the source of the unique delight. This is perfectly expressed in the highest poetic art, tragedy.
Oh, absolutely. Tragedy is the clearest representation of the strife of will with itself. The hero is destroyed, but only after their own internal will leads them to resignation, purifying them through the recognition of the world's inescapable suffering.
It's a moment of profound, terrible insight.
It is.
And then, standing separate from all other arts, bypassing the ideas entirely, is music. Why is music the deepest key to his metaphysics?
Music is unique because it is not a copy of the idea, the phenomenal blueprint, but the direct copy of the will itself.
Ooh.
It speaks in the universal language of emotion and striving.
So music translates the very structure of the will into sound.
It does. It expresses all possible efforts and manifestations of the will, the tension, the release, the satisfaction, and the longing, but without the specific material of life. The deepest bass notes represent the lowest grades of will, the forces of nature.
And the melody.
The highest melody represents the intellect's expression. It is so deeply true to essence that Schopenhauer declares the world itself could be called embodied music as embodied will.
What a dense, challenging, and, well, essential deep dive. We've established that the objective, rational, causal world, the idea, which we mistake for ultimate reality, is merely the surface fabricated by the brain.
And beneath it lies the unified, striving, suffering, and fundamentally groundless essence, the will.
And this knowledge creates the individual's core tragedy.
It really does. You find yourself as the whole, infinite will to live, the essence of existence. Yet you are agonizingly separated from every other manifestation of that same will by the principium individuationis, by time and space.
And that separation ensures egoism and the constant striving that leads to pain. Since Schopenhauer tells us that our individual character, the will, is unchangeable and fixed, but our intellect, our reason, constantly changes, learns, and improves. We have to ask ourselves this. If the will is the source of all striving, and striving is suffering, how much of the frustration, boredom, and pain you experience in your life is actually caused by the external world? And how much is simply the inevitable internal friction resulting from the fierce and constant demands of your own unchangeable will? That is the core conflict that only insight can resolve.